Lamellar armor. Lamellar armor is an armor that is made up of a series of small iron plates that are laced together or sewn together with fabric or leather. They have many different sizes and shapes of plates that can make up the armor. Most of them are based on location and area where the plates were designed. The armor is overlapped vertically depending on how much movability the wearer requires, and it differs in the way that it wrapped around the body. If the rows are connected from top to bottom, it was for more stability, whereas opposite from bottom to top, it was for flexibility. The image on the right shows the many different types of plate designs. They have numerous holes for connecting the pieces together and different shapes for the geographic region which they were created. Now there's a few different structures for these armors. The first is integral. It is an initial assembly of the rows which is done by tying the lamelles together without any backing. The next is edged. The initial stage of assembly involves wrapping the edges of the rows with strips of leather. The backed is a strip of flexible material, leather usually, which extends along the back of a row of lamelles to support or stabilize it. The banded, which is backing that extends beyond the top edges of the plates to create a plain division between the rows. Solid lace are rows that are bonded firmly together with little movement. Hanging is a little bit different, where it is a row that is bound loosely, allowing movement mostly vertical. And there's two categories of this hanging lamellar: amorphous and structured. Amorphous is the connection between the rows that is suspension laces, allowing lateral as well as vertical movement. Structured is the end of the rows that have been stabilized in some manner. These are examples of the way that the lamellar armor was connected. You can see the way the holes in order to connect the different pieces. The armor has many different versions of plates, which was shown before. Now these examples are of the different lamellar armors. The first is a statue which was discovered in China of a soldier wearing the lamellar armor. The middle is of a Chinese warrior armor. And the final one is of a Tibetan example of lamellar armor. Each have different strategies for connecting them and the shapes of the plates. For example, the Chinese warrior armor has a more rigid look to it, whereas the Tibetan appears like it is allowed to make the wearer be able to move around in it. The warrior armor was actually not usable. It was more for decoration and to be put in the tomb with the deceased. The Tibetan armor was an armor that was used and worn in the 16th and 17th centuries. In comparison to Tibetan armor of an earlier date, this armor has plates that are coarser, darker in color, and the pieces are finished more roughly with irregular sizes. As seen, there are many different versions of lamellar armor. The first indication of lamellar armor coming about was way back in 2000 BC. Ever since their use has been seen within militaristic institutions. Due to the fact that there are so many different versions of it indicates that there was not one specific point of origin where the armor may have started off. Timothy Dawson explains in his book, Armor Never Wearies, that lamellar armor was a technology invented and reinvented anew time and again. It had a lot of variety in the way that it was made, both in the stitching together of it and the sizing and shapes of the plates stitched together as seen in the previous slides. The image on the right shows an example of lamellar armor. Some individual plates called lamella were found in Burqa between 1877 and 2000, and they were dated all the way back to the 10th century. Dawson explains that the development of Chinese iron armor in general moved from large lamella shapes to small ones, from fixed bindings to primarily flexible bindings, and from a relatively simple style to many different ones. There are some indications of how one culture was influenced by another and the armor that shows that. One example is the Japanese lamellar armor. It has a definite Han period influence on it, but due to the Chinese people and the traditions they have, the armor was altered and adapted to fit the needs of their people. One way this is seen is in their lamella shapes. The Han period lamella was of a small tongue-shaped design, and the Japanese style was of a mid-sized rectangular shape. Here is a comparison of the Japanese armor and the Han period armor. You can see the way the shapes of the plates are different. The stitching is similar, using leather straps to connect them. The shoulder pieces differ slightly, one that goes down onto the arm with the Han. The Japanese only covers the shoulders. The Japanese lamellar armor eventually transitioned into the armor known today, primarily worn by the samurai. The pre-samurai armor was known as kaigo. The form of samurai armor that is most widely known is the oyori, meaning the great armor. It first started to appear in the 10th century. It was heavy and didn't allow much flexibility or movement. This type of armor fell out of favor by about the 15th century due to its inability to allow the wearer to move around easily. It was mostly for the higher-ranking officials. The lower-ranking samurai wore similar armor that had a few components to it, and it was lighter and it was much less decorative than the great armor. Here is a comparison between the great armor and the lighter armor of the lower-ranked samurai. You can see how the left has a more decoration than compared to the right, and the left shows how much more armor they wore and compared to someone of a lower rank like the right one shows it's much more lightweight. In the 15th century, the armor was changed to be a little bit more lightweight. That way the wearer could move around easier and were able to fulfill infantry tactics more efficiently. And the conclusion slide shows how some of the stuff that we presented today. So the lamellar armor was made by rows of plates that were attached together by leather strips. It began to appear in about 2000 BC. Some were made for flexibility, while others were made for stability, and the plates that made up the armor were different in size and shape. There was some influence to other cultures, and that the Japanese lamellar armor transitioned into the armor associated with the samurai.